We have a long history in this area in data archiving in the social sciences, specifically in New Zealand. In 2007, we secured a Tertiary Education Commission grant to look into setting up an online data archive. Many of you will be familiar with Peter Davis, our founding director, and he was a big fan, had been for many years, of data sharing, and there were already some local efforts that had been going on. Most recently at that time had been Henry Barnard's New Zealand Social Research Data Archives through Massey University, but none of it was really in enough of an infrastructure state to really modernise and put out a purely online package of data access and sort of browsing full metadata with all the supporting information. So at the university at the time, we worked with the BEST Grid group, which is the Broadband-Enabled Science and Technology Grid, 2007. It sounds a bit weird to say broadband-enabled now, but that was a big deal. And they had the Kiwi Advanced Research and Education Network, which had been set up recently at that time. They were really more about high-performance computing and offered more power than we actually needed. But they were looking for use cases for this network, and we were a good ticket because we were the Faculty of Arts, and almost everyone else they were getting interest from was science or elsewhere. So it was good luck to have a bit of a different group. On the international front, the Australians had already had a social science data archive at ANU for many years, and when we talked to them, we realised that we were coming into the market at a really good time because we could do everything online. They had talked about horror stories with, having to hand people physical media and then make sure they were destroyed and things like that. And we learned a whole lot of new acronyms by talking to them. Nesta was the piece of software that we then used for the fully online repository, which was Networked Social Science Tools and Resources, and that was maintained by the Norwegian Data Archive, NSD. It handled metadata using the Data Documentation Initiative. DDI3 was the current version just coming in at that time. And that was a major expansion of systems like the Dublin Core, which kept on coming up in all discussions about those sorts of things. Suffice it to say, we were coming in and using sort of what people were using and packages that were truly tailored for working with social science data and its curation. And then our manager at the time and I attended the conference of IASSIST, the International Association for Social Science Information Service and Technology in Montreal, and everyone there was talking about their experiences with data archives with Nesta and DDI3, and I found this the other day, which was the actual proceedings from that conference 12 years ago. We've just physically moved about a month ago within the university and been chucking out a whole bunch of filed stuff from 14 years ago, but this was a good keeper. And yes, as I said, a lot of it was about Nesta and metadata, and a lot of that was just, we've set up this archive in a lot of different countries. And there was the Council of European Social Science Data Archives even had a site where they linked about 20 different countries' archives in Nesta, and you could go in there and search keywords and find questions from all sorts of different surveys. I've actually got a video screen capture of that in a couple of slides. And then on top of all that, with all this ideas of best practice, we set up the New Zealand Social Science Data Service. So there's all the acronyms and abbreviations. Nesta, so as I said, we set up, with the help of ASTA on the Karen network, we set up a server instance of Nesta. It was a pretty powerful piece of software and running online, but it was also highly proprietary, as things tended to be in those days. And it was quite expensive to run. The server license was $12,000 US a year or so. It was a piece of software that was kind of function over form. It was not pretty, and it was quite hard work on the admin side. And whenever we updated that license, you had to run a program called fix.bat that the Australians had written for us to get it running again, because it wasn't as simple as that. But it was very capable. When we'd set it up, users could go in for free and browse metadata, download documentation, download questionnaires, and look at the variable lists and one-way frequency tables. Then there was a permission structure so that we could go in and set permissions for different people, different logins. People could log in, and then they would be able to construct crosstabs and graphs, They could even run simple regressions in the online tool. And then there was a proprietary data format that enabled people to download data sets that could be converted to any number of common formats, which was probably the killer feature in terms of the ease of storage, because it was a very small, your data was kept very small by that structure. And this is sort of a view that I got off the web archive. No, this is actually a movie that I screen captured I took at the time of what our website looked like at a point. You can see this was even before Compass had a logo, so 2007, I would say. And I was pleased to see that this one still played, and it shows the process of going through. I couldn't find any footage of our archive, even though I know I did take some, but this is the Council of European Social Science Archives, and going through just all these countries that were involved, and very similar to what ours looked like, just a simple search I do here for health, and you get 27,000 questions that had keywords of health in them, and you can see that this is the Nestar archive, very similar to how ours looked, where it's got the information on numbers. Unfortunately, no actual numbers on the individual values there, but it gives you an idea. And that was then, that has to go twice for the video. That was then what we had by the end of, well, eventually we had about 40 data sets, including the New Zealand election study, which had actually been held by ASTA for a number of years for Jack Bowser's team, as well as they had their own archive where you could just download data sets on their own website. The International Social Survey Program, which to that point had been run out of Massey University by Phil Gendel. More recently, we've been running that study, but it was an amazing set of data from 91 to 2010 that he produced. The World Internet Project out of AUT, and some of Peter's own work before Compass, including the National Primary Medical Care Survey. Due to with the permission structure, some of those did have to be sort of locked down a bit because there were already in place some quite complex access protocols. But it enabled us to do that, and people could still see that they were available. We added value to just the data sets by producing also some teaching materials to go along with them for like self-help teaching using SPSS. And then we had several summer students over a couple of years producing what we called enhanced publications, which were published articles from some of the data sets that we stored, some of the work that we'd done as well, and alongside program code that was used to do the analysis so that people could come along and replicate or scrutinize what had been done. And it was sort of a novel package. Unfortunately, again, some of the data sets weren't freely available, so it limited the appeal a little bit, but it was noble intentions. And so until 2012, that's what we had. In 2012, we decided that we couldn't justify renewing the license. We just weren't seeing the usage. We only had sort of about 50 users had signed up, and very few of them had actually then done any data requests or anything like that. And then we started looking at what else was available. By that time, the open source movement was going sort of heavily, and we had then a summer student co-hosted with the National eScience Infrastructure at the university, which was one of the groups that formed out of BestGrid. And that was looking at Dataverse, which was a new up-and-coming package that had been adopted at an institutional level. In places overseas, it was envisaged as a multi-user platform that could be adopted in that sort of state, and different staff members could have their own pages with resources. But it was also really good for curation of the social science data kind of items, and had permissions structures associated with it. But as was typical of the open source stuff at the time, it was quite highly technical to run. Code needed to be sort of uploaded to a server to deposit data and that sort of thing, so that didn't go any further at that time. Then about a year later, another ex-BestGrid group, the Centre for E-Research, managed to set up a university-wide repository using Figshare, which was a sort of a competing package, but it wasn't anywhere near as tailored for social science data. It's really just a general repository for files, and people could upload in a list that was really just based on how recent it had been uploaded. So it was very hard to find things. They had some buy-in from the library at the university at that point, which was one of the things we'd always been trying to do, but just when it looked like you were going to get some really good traction, people would move on, projects would end, and you'd be back to square one. And what really, I mean, we recreated our data archive there because it was free to use within the university, but it was very much just minimal metadata because they constructed some fields for us, but then they weren't kept up to date when they updated the software. And even recently, this is what that front page looks like now. It's got our old location, but we were in the glass building just behind that. But I had to update these thumbnails by, it really takes a little bit of the middle of the PDF, of the front page of the questionnaire PDF as that little thumbnail. It's completely ridiculous. You don't have any control over it. I don't have any control over the sort order. It's by recency, and but we do have these collections of data from the ISSP and from the election study that we also use in teaching at the university ourselves. So that is really the sort of the main benefit of it now. And we have our own page there that people can access without having to try and find things in the multitude of files that whoever has uploaded. So that's the address for that. Then again, a couple of years later, the Australian Data Archive, no longer just social science, they moved their holdings from the Nestar catalogue to Dataverse. So it was a few years on and things were getting a little bit better in terms of user friendliness. And we have been in talks with them recently around a couple of conferences and general meetings to try and get our data sets hosted and better curated there so that you can have all the metadata nicely displayed, questionnaires available, data available to be looked at, and permission structures so that the data can be there and it can be clear that they are available on request. But because with Figshare you couldn't lock it down, you could only have the data there or freely available or not there at all. And also one of the things I find annoying about that with talking about the thumbnails and changing things, every time you change something in there because it's got a DOI, it creates a new version of it. And so if I just change that PDF to make the thumbnail look better, there is an older version now that is there forever that is only for that reason. It just seemed inefficient and also not great in terms of security. If you changed things for reasons other than just looks. And so they've now done some of the work to get our data sets up, but I just need to find time to get back onto them about it. And it may be that that's a good solution. The ISS conference this year came close to home, came to Sydney, and so it was much easier to attend again. It's only done sort of US, Canada, Europe for the last 40 years before that, so it was a really big deal. It's a conference held in May, so it seems to be cold wherever it is in the world, but it is comes over here and it reduces in size by 2/3, which is a little bit of a shame because we have to go a long way wherever it is, and they can't come sort of once. But it was really interesting to go and see that Dataverse is the new way to go. It was when it was Nestar in 2007, 12 years will do this. There was a group, people from actually the Dataverse project talking about how widely used it is. 43, they said 43 installs with underneath that there's 4,300 dataverses, which I guess is, I'm not really sure, but I think it's for sort of individual people or individual collections. I think the Australian Archive is putting ours in our own Dataverse under their umbrella. And 7.7 million downloads of data sets. I don't know quite how they collected all that information, but it sounds nice and impressive, and it is now a much more modern appearance and clearly user-friendly in these environments because so many people are. And what I found really interesting as well is that where in 2007 I was blown away by this concept of data librarians that everyone else seemed to take for granted and had them embedded in university libraries and things like that, where we would go, we'd love to have that sort of stuff and people responsible for research stuff coming in. The University of Auckland has like a research space for student theses that have been uploaded because I think they're obliged to, but it doesn't really go a lot further than that. And again, we've tried several times with them and the people have been interested in the data archive, but it just doesn't gain traction. But this year, it was programmers. Sort of the computer science is becoming more of a big deal in the social sciences because programmers are really important in this open source environment that they're able to extend the Dataverse with their own add-ons, and there was talk about updates coming where they're going to be doing things like making it better for big data, making it more appropriate for social media data, and working with persistent identifiers for different sorts of items. The social media data thing was actually really interesting discussions around what is public and what does public mean, and they all seem to think that people posting things on Twitter and all that were assuming sort of that it would be not publicly available by obscurity, and I differed in opinion on some of that, so there was some good discussion around that, but in terms of research, it's a fascinating area. And in other ways that people have been advancing, not just the software in terms of Dataverse, but they're talking about other things. There's various online tools that I heard about to sort of do things like automating the assessment of your data quality. You can put up your data set and it'll tell you this variable that needs to be better somehow, but they were putting a sort of a GUI front end on that. The UK Data Archive had created a command line, and this was the Australian archive putting a sort of a GUI front end on a website to that, so it was good to see sort of collaboration as well, because this is an international association that they're dealing with. Similarly, there was another tool for that with metadata, which is probably a bigger issue, because it has to be, you know, the data are only as good as really the description of them, in terms of if you don't know what you're looking at, how useful is that? And there was a tool to guide new researchers through the whole data management process and storing materials and all that sort of thing. And then there was one where they were very bravely looking at your data sets and your publications associated with them, and then other things that these authors had written and data sets that were associated with them, and so you're ending up linking a whole lot of things that are not necessarily in the same field even, but it was some quite powerful things being discussed. And one of the things I was really amazed about was the ISS group. One of the things they do is provide fellowships or scholarships for people in developing countries to attend, and there was talk of some with repositories being set up at the national level and sort of, you know, research projects would start and they would be informed and be holding the data, and I was just like, that would be sort of bliss from our research perspective. It was quite impressive, and in Australia specifically, they were going, well, we've got all these data sets, and there's a whole lot of very old stuff. They were thinking, oh, let's modernise and digitise and then archive things like government gazettes from 1849 to 1968, bigamy crime statistics from 1849 to 1999, and ethical concerns around that. And while the government gazettes were publicly available, you had to request them, making that discovery process much easier had its own challenges to think around. And that really was one of the big takeaways from that conference, that everyone was thinking about and talking about ethics, and what Barry's going to be talking about next, statistical disclosure risk, especially in the context of these data archives. Not exactly a surprise when you've got all these people talking about linking huge amounts of data, having persistent identifiers of people, and there was discussion around especially panel data where you've got repeated measures on people, and just how easy it was then to identify people if you had 2 or 3 waves included. And of course we've just been recently thinking about the whole online panel space, so it was interesting to hear that as well. So really, I originally was sort of going to finish off there and move on to Barry, but it was pointed out to me that I should have kind of a summary on this specifically. I mean, I've been involved since the beginning, since we did this in 2007, and we've been through several attempts trying to get traction within the university, the library, the Centre for E-Research, which then kind of just left everything a bit a little bit static. My conclusion really at the end of it is maybe we're just not sort of big enough for New Zealand social science. There may not be the supply and demand for these data sets to have our own curated data structure, and possibly this idea, a new idea that was also an old idea, given that ASTA held those election study data sets for us in the 80s and 90s. Whether being part of their archive is sort of a good solution. And in our space, we know very well that the declining response rates in survey research make the sharing of data even more valuable to the people involved. And so it's kind of a surprise that we haven't seen that demand. But what we can do, and what we are involved in doing, is currently improving curation on data sets we do have. We've been looking at creating some more modern data dictionaries for the election studies and enabling better compatibility of the data sets over time so that we can look at changes more readily, because as response rates decline, looking back over data we have, I think becomes more appetizing as well. And taking advantage of some of these tools that I kind of phrased at the beginning as falling behind, but as I talked about with the national repositories in developing countries, where you come into the market at a different point, you can take advantage of what has been done. So we have opportunities, and as Barry will be talking about soon, we're also able to make our own contributions to the field in other areas without necessarily having our own data archive. But it's going to be really interesting to see how it goes with the Australian Archive getting our stuff in there. And that's what I've done. Are there any questions? Yes.
I'm interested in whether, I'm assuming not from what you've said, but I thought I shouldn't assume.
Sure.
So this is principally survey data, quantitative data sets.
Yep.
Do you have any qualitative data sets, as they do, for example, in UK data?
No, we haven't gone that route, mainly because we didn't have them in the stuff that we wanted to archive or any of the other things we knew about. But yeah, the UK Data Archive have done some quite impressive stuff in that area, and we have used some of their items for our research methods teaching on the qualitative side. And it's obviously much harder to prepare things for the data archiving in that space with anonymisation. One of the surveys that I think we used I think it was from there or from somewhere else, it was anonymised to the point of being kind of useless, where you could only identify in a focus group if it was a male or female speaking, and so you couldn't follow what individual people had said with characteristics. So another one was much, much better in terms of you've got names for all these people, even if they're falsified names, but it's a really interesting area, but I just don't know enough about it.